Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Jordan Rutter, Director of Communications at American Bird Conservancy. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you afterward. We'll be putting links in the chat, but in case you missed them or just can't get them down fast enough, please know that everything can be found in a follow-up email we'll send to you and always on abcbirds.org. Please submit any questions you have during the presentations using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And know that automated captions are available for this webinar, and you can turn them on by clicking on the CC icon. Before we begin, I want to share some background on American Bird Conservancy, shortened to ABC, which was founded in 1994 with the mission of protecting wild birds and their habitats across the Americas. We continue that work today following a conservation strategy outlined by the pyramid featured on the current slide. Our work strives to help keep common birds common and prevent the rarest species from going extinct. And bird conservation works. Species and groups of birds have rebounded in the past decades, but there's so much more to do, and American Bird Conservancy needs your help to do it. ABC's work is made possible thanks to people like you who care about birds and our planet. Today, as you learn about how ABC is conserving seabirds and their habitats, please consider supporting ABC's marine program to help make these critical efforts possible. You can donate now at abcbirds.org/marine or by scanning the code you see on today's slide with your phone. Thank you so much for caring about birds, and a special thank you to all of our ABC members and donors in the audience right now. You're making a difference for wild birds and their habitats every single day. Soaring into the world of seabirds will take you further than you may have expected to go. If you go to the edge of dry land and stare out into the ocean, you may be lucky to see some birds fly close enough to give you a glimpse of a world you can't get to on your own. And there's places especially known for opportunities to look further during migration or in the winter and see birds like northern gannet or puffins. But the world of seabirds is much, much bigger than that. And to get there, you need to go beyond the horizon. So imagine it's 4 a.m. at a dock. You're really nervous, but so excited. You've got a backpack stuffed with snacks and gear, and you're putting a lot of faith into some Dramamine. You're about to board a ship and head out into the open ocean for a pelagic, an experience with birds that simply isn't possible on dry land. Albatrosses, shearwaters, storm-petrels, skuas, and more. Birds that boast some of the most record-breaking adaptations and behaviors out of any in the world, outflying thousands of miles across open water, living the majority of their lives in places mostly unseen by humans. But unfortunately, out of sight also means out of mind, usually, which can have disastrous consequences. And for seabirds, it has. Seabirds are the fastest declining bird family in the world, and their populations have dropped a staggering 70% globally over the past 60 years. We must pay attention to these magnificent birds to ensure their survival. They need our help as much as we and the marine ecosystems they support need them. So I'm so excited for you to learn more about this incredible group of birds adapted to live in places and in ways many people would never expect, and how American Bird Conservancy and our partners are working to conserve them. I hope it leaves you more curious than before and excited for your next pelagic adventure. So let me introduce you to our speakers. Dr. Sea McKeon is ABC's Marine Program Director. Sea is a biodiversity scientist and natural historian focused on the conservation of marine ecosystems. An avid and enthusiastic conservationist and science communicator, he has participated in expeditions to remote reaches of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean basins, investigating the response of global diversity to environmental challenges. We also have Dr. Fernando Medrano, who is Deputy Director at Red de Observadores de Aves y Vida Silvestre de Chile, the network of bird and wildlife observers of Chile. And he has had a lifelong interest in wildlife and holds a PhD in storm-petrelology from the University of Barcelona. Fernando is part of the rediscovery of the first breeding colonies for Markham's, ringed, and Elliott storm petrels in the Atacama Desert, and has also been involved in the study of storm petrels in Canary Islands, Cabo Verde, and the Guadalupe Island. And last but not least, we have Dr. Kate Huyvaert, of Rocky Crate and Wild Sheep Foundation and Chair for Wild Sheep Disease Research at Washington State University. In 2021, Kate pivoted to this research-intensive position focused on infectious disease ecology and population health after 14 years at Colorado State University. Her love of nature and the outdoors emerged from hours spent exploring the creek behind her grandparents' house where she grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And this fascination with the natural world has fueled over 35 field trips to the Galapagos over the past 30 years. Kate continues work on seabirds, tackling questions about population responses to extrinsic threats such as disease, plastics, and effects of global change. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to C to start things off. His presentation is going to be in 2 parts, but first up, he's going to help us focus on seabirds at large and how incredible they are. Welcome, C.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it. And thank you for being here, all of you in our audience. We appreciate you as well. So 7/10 of our world is water. 7/10 of it is covered by water. And the entirety of that area is occupied by birds. And seabirds are, as Jordan said, remarkable in many, many ways. One of those ways is the group's diversity. So we have an alphabet of seabirds from Aleutian tern to Zeno's petrel. And across that alphabet, we have terns and frigate birds and ducks and penguins and pelicans and boobies and albatrosses and tropic birds. The list just continues, and it continues in remarkable ways. One of those ways might be that seabirds might be closer to your home than you realize. So it doesn't require a beach to be neighbors with a seabird. Many loons, ducks, the skuas and jaegers, even a type of shorebird called phalaropes, live in the interior of continents and then are ocean birds for the other part of the year. So they're breeding on land in the interior of continents and then fully fledged seabirds during the alternative season. The remarkable ways that seabird diversity can be measured, though, continue. So storm-petrels can be the size of a sparrow or sometimes even smaller, fitting easily in the palm of your hand. Whereas the great albatrosses, you could stand toe-to-toe with. They're human proportioned. There are champions all over the seabird world. So the largest wingspan is wandering albatross. The longest migration is sooty shearwater. Longest annual migration, the Arctic tern, flying from one pole to the other. The deepest diver is emperor penguin at an astounding 1,850 feet. And they have profound ecosystem impacts as well. So one of the things that seabirds do really well is move marine nutrients from offshore environments to coastal environments. And this has been the basis of agriculture for human empire. Seabirds are powerful indicators of oceanic health, and we use them in that way today, in part because they share perspective with humans, that several feet above the water at about 20 miles an hour is a perspective that is shared just between seabirds and humans. And I'm sad to say, as Jordan pointed out, they're almost all in decline. So with 70% declines in seabird populations between 1950 and 2010, they're literally sliding off the graph. The problems are numerous. Plastic debris and waste, conflict with fisheries, coastal development, offshore energy development, introduced mammal predators on breeding islands, and perhaps the most insidious is invisibility. Just that out of sight, out of mind concept. Most people do not get to see seabirds routinely in their lives. There are no backyard seabird feeders. There are no backyard seabird houses. And that means that we have to actively act against their invisibility, make them more visible for conservation purposes. And that's part of why we're here today. So today, we're going to be taking a 3-step process. You have to be able to, 1, find the seabirds, 2, know their lives and challenges, and then 3, take conservation action. We are normally dealing with partners. We are a partner-based organization. So ABC, that is how we run. And so today we've brought two partners in to talk about those first two steps. Jordan?
Thanks so much, See. We'll come back to you after Fernando and Kate speak, but next up is Fernando, who's going to take us on a digital journey of the desert, where, believe it or not, some seabirds actually nest. So Fernando, if you want to get your screen set up.
You, Jordan, and I think you see as well. I'm sharing my screen now. So please let me know if you can see that.
You're all set. Take it away.
Thank you very much. And of course, thank you, Jordan, Erica, and all the ABC team as well for inviting me representing ROC today. I'm the scientific director of this organization and also in charge of the development of parts of the world for Latin America. But I had the luck of being born in this narrow but very, very long piece of land called Chile in the extreme corner of South America. This is one of the hotspots for seabirds in the world, which goes from subtropical oceans directly toward subantarctic oceans. And as a sample of this, for example, in a single pelagic trip, you can be surrounded by hundreds, literally hundreds of albatrosses of different species. For example, here I'm showing a picture of a pelagic trip with some hundreds of black-browed albatross, but you also can see many other species like Laysan albatrosses, Fuller's albatross, etc. As I learned soon in my ornithological career, when I was leading the first ring bird atlas for Chile, there are very important gaps in our knowledge on this group of species. And for instance, the location of the breeding colonies for many, many species of seabirds was mostly unknown only 10 years ago. For example, there were known colonies known for the ring storm-petrel that I'm showing in this slide. And there were only a couple for all the other species. And by that time, we had a Chilean birding online forum where somebody mentioned that this person saw snipes flying in the middle of the night and in the middle of the desert. And one of our friends, of our ROC friends that you may know, who is Alvaro Jaramillo, told us, pay attention, guys. This might be your storm-petrels. So we headed directly to the Atacama Desert with the hope of finding these colonies. And we created this project called Golondrinas del Desierto. And after sniffing literally thousands of cavities, spending thousands of hours in the Atacama Desert, we started finding the first clues of a storm-petrel nest, including, for example, footprints like what I'm showing in the left side of this slide. And we also were using boroscopes for inspecting what was inside the cavities that we were finding. And this is what we were seeing with the boroscope. We started finding the first breeding sites of all these species, in this case of the Markham storm-petrel, but also of the ring storm-petrel, for example, that I'm showing in this slide. Now, 11 years after we started finding these colonies, we have knowledge of more than 20 breeding sites for the first species, which were found, for example, by ROC, but also by one of our partners, which is the Chilean Wildlife Service, or SAG. However, there is a long way to go still. Only 6 months ago, which is like yesterday, some people of our NGO found the first inland breeding colony of the wedge-ramped storm-petrel, which holds a breeding population of several thousands of birds. So that indicates that we are still very far of a full understanding of which are the colonies of storm petrels in Chile. And that's indeed the case of a population of what is currently known as the Wilson storm petrel. We started making some efforts to try to understand, because we were getting some information of grounded fledglings, and we started making an effort systematizing that information. And we have been gathering several dozens of fledglings per year just next to Santiago, which is super crazy, which is the capital of Chile. And something interesting is that we are indeed proposing that this population is a new species based on genes and on morphometric analysis. This is an article that is gonna be released very soon. And we propose that this species is gonna be called the Andean storm petrel. However, it probably breeds in vast areas where it seems almost impossible to find the colonies. So one approach that we have been using is the use of moon watching. That means to watch the moon with the aid of a terrestrial telescope. And in some areas, we find hotspots of birds passing by the moon. And now in those hotspots areas, we're gonna try to use a similar approach to what was used for the New Zealand storm petrel, in which Rainer and collaborators use tags to find the colonies, and we're gonna do a similar approach on the next breeding season. And another mystery is what's happening with this other species, which is the Pincoya storm petrel. It's a newly described species, was described 10 years ago. However, in these 10 years, we have the same knowledge that we had when the species was described. And to try to advance in the knowledge, we have been doing a citizen science campaign in which we invite people to try to inform us when they find fledglings. And we have now a map of the potential breeding locations, thanks to this project developed by Rock in the northern Patagonia. This is the case not only in Chile, but in many parts of the world. And for example, just a couple of years ago, there were the confirmation of the Van Randt storm petrel breeding in an area that is more or less well explored, like East Hawaii. And that might also be the case of this storm petrel, which is the Guadalupe storm petrel, for which American Bird Conservancy did have a project, which is the search of lost birds. This species is either extinct or close to be extinct. So it's very important to try to understand what is the real status of this species. And finally, as you can see in these graphs that were extracted from birds of the world, the storm petrels are two groups that are more threatened than most birds in the world, as you can see in this comparison. And that is something that we have learned in Chile as well. For example, the light pollution, where thousands of birds are being grounded by light every year of Markham storm petrel. And this happens as well in other areas, for example, with Leech storm petrel in Canada. Then we have the impact of mining projects, which have an impact on the breeding sites of the storm petrels that breed in the desert. We have the development of energy, the weights, etc. And for doing so, our NGO is protecting some of the breeding areas. And thanks to the aid of ABC, we have been able to protect one of the main breeding colonies of the Markham storm petrel. That has been also the case of the light pollution. So now our NGO supervised the Chilean government to build a national regulation regarding the artificial lighting. Now the cities, for example, will have to change the lights that they use, putting some lights that are more friendly towards the seabirds. So that's all, and you are all invited to check out the accounts, for example, of Birds of the World of the Markham storm-petrel, which have much more details of what I say today. And thank you very much for listening. This wouldn't be possible without the support of many partners, including American Bird Conservancy.
Thank
So
you so
thank
much,
you so much.
Fernando. We're going to talk to you in the Q&A portion because we can't wait to learn even more about what you just shared. But we're going to move on to Kate to learn about some of the largest birds in the world now. So Kate, if you want to get your screen shared. Wonderful. Take it away.
Excellent. Well, thanks to C, Jordan, and Erica for the invitation, and to you all for joining us today to talk about my all-time favorite bird, and that's this guy, the waved albatross. So when you close your eyes and imagine an albatross, what does it look like? Many of us, and where are they? Many of us may be familiar with Wilbur and Orville, the albatross taxis in Disney's Rescuers and Rescuers Down Under. Others might think of the poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, about a medieval sailor's travails to the South Pole and back, surrounded by the ocean, where there was water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. You might have heard of tracking studies that have really come to the fore and shown us that albatrosses spend most of their time in the southern oceans. And so all of these colors are tracking data on different albatross species, and you can see that they spend an awful lot of time in the southern oceans. But today, I'd like to focus on, this is the waved albatross. This is the only tropically breeding albatross in the world, and it's found almost exclusively on the island of Hispaniola, which is the southeasternmost island of the Galapagos. And you can see these red portions of the island in the little cartoon of the island. And this is where the albatrosses spend most of their time. It's along the southern coast where wind is strong enough to take off into. And so this evokes that idea of Orville and Wilbur when they've got Bianca and Bernard on their backs and they need a runway to take off into. Very similar with these guys too. But an important question is, you know, if we think about albatrosses and they're supposed to be at the South Pole in the Southern Oceans, how is there an albatross right on the equator there in Galapagos? Well, part of it has to do with climate. The Galapagos are characterized by two different seasons, the cool, dry season for about half the year and the warm, wet season for the other half of the year. The Galapagos get a lot of their water inputs or their ocean inputs from the Humboldt Current, which comes up from the southern oceans, goes along the coast of South America, and bumps out to the Galapagos. And Galapagos is also shaped by the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And that's a time of year that we all are probably quite familiar with after this past year, where things in Galapagos are really, really warm and really, really wet. For the waved albatross, they hang out on the southeasternmost island of the Galapagos. And this is the place where the Humboldt Current hits first when it hits Galapagos. And this is Hispaniola looking from the west to the east. So it could very well be the case that if we dropped a drop of water in the Humboldt Current, say by Peru, by the time it makes itself out to Galapagos, it hits Hispaniola. But what I'd like to do really is to introduce the life story or the life history of this species. So I'm going to start out with this idea from ecology and evolution, and it's the idea that every organism has a life history or a life story, and that those life stories are marked by key events. So humans have life histories, and in my own is tied closely to the waved albatross. I grew up with my grandparents. They're pictured here on the far left. I got exposed to science as a way of getting to know the world. My grandmother was a chemist and quite competitive with my grandfather in terms of enjoying and getting out in nature. So her fish is bigger than his. Then I went to Wake Forest for college and met a professor there who might be on this call, I hope, who hired me as a field assistant working on the waved albatross. And this was way back in 1994. And I've spent the years since then working on questions about seabird life histories, population biology, and conservation. There's a life story that we've learned about and put together about the waved albatross too, and it's characterized by things that take a really long time. So the key events for the waved albatross start out with copulation and incubation of this very large egg, can take upwards of 2 months. Then both parents incubate that egg. Then they spend 5 to 7 months foraging and provisioning that chick. Those chicks fledge and spend 5 to 7 years invisible. They're out at sea. We don't know a whole lot about them. And then they spend 1 to 4 decades as adults. Let's dive in though and have a little bit closer look and learn a little bit more about that life history. So the waved albatross and many albatross species dance, and dancing can start in October or November, especially in December. And this is when known mates are reminding each other about what they've just been through. Maybe they've successfully raised a chick and the chick is about to fledge, or maybe it's youngsters that haven't quite met their pair bond yet, so they're meeting new folks. They're doing a lot of dancing. Then all of the animals, all of the albatross will leave the island and they're gone at sea until about mid-March or so. In late March to mid-April, birds will return to Hispaniola to copulate. And what's interesting about this is that sort of the traditional knowledge, or the traditional knowledge is that albatrosses and other really large birds like this mate for life. And we thought that was the case too when I got started on my dissertation work. And, that's characterized by copulations within the pair bond or within pair copulations. And they happen with mated pairs, and it looks an awful lot like this. But there's also quite a lot of other stuff going on, and these are extra pair copulations, so copulations outside of the pair bond. And it turns out that when we watch and we look and we record who does what with whom, the majority of copulations are actually outside of the pair bond. For the copulation work, as I mentioned, we spent hours and hours watching who does what with whom. And to do this, we need unique names that we can see in the field. And so birds have field readable bands. We place these on one leg, we place a steel band on the other leg, and the field readable ones are really nice. They're uniquely numbered. So this one is, for example, 3209. And so when we're out there watching who's doing what with whom, we can jot down, 3209, so on and so forth. We use these to tell their story of romance, but also to check them annually to ask about survival rates and other indicators of how the population is doing. And so these bands, they'll come back as part of the story in a little bit. As I mentioned, females will lay one single very large egg towards the end of the copulation season. So we're talking about from May, June, and maybe a little bit into July. It's biparental care. So both parents will incubate the egg. They'll take turns incubating. This is for 63 days. They'll have short shifts early in the 63 days, and then they'll turn into longer shifts and then come back to shorter shifts so that when the chick hatches, they're ready to start provisioning that chick. This, for example, is a pipped egg. You can see that little dark spot on the egg that the parent is incubating. Sometimes it'll take a couple of days for the chick to fully hatch. Most youngsters, again, are hatching late June to late July. And then both parents need to care for the chicks. And I mentioned that portion or that event in their life history is 5 to 7 months. Early on, parents will stay close to home, so they'll stay within the archipelago typically, and come back every day or so while the other parent broods that small chick. As the chick gets bigger, parents can leave it alone and they'll commute back and forth to that Humboldt current, that nutrient-rich Humboldt current off the coast of Peru and Ecuador, so 1,000 kilometers away, where they'll forage for fish and squid and then come back to regurgitate a concentrated oil-rich goo, if you will. And so this line, if you will, from the parent down to the ground is this concentrated oil that the parent's attempting to feed to its really large chick. And then there are some Espanola mockingbirds trying to get a little bit of a meal too. So this happens until about December, sometimes early January. By that time, chicks are fully grown and they can fly. And so chicks will fledge, and then parents need to take a bit of a vacation to recover their body condition. For example, this guy has a bunch of head lice up on its head, so you can tell that that parent has been spending all of its effort and energy on raising the chick, foraging for the chick, and doesn't have enough time to really, take care of its own needs. Okay. Juveniles, as I mentioned, do a bit of a disappearing act and will leave the colony only to be seen for the first time 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 years later. We know that birds are starting to breed for the first time later than they did 50 years ago, based on some analyses that we did on those on resites of those uniquely banded birds. Again, we know all of this because we can track those individuals based on their unique band numbers. And this is telling us a little bit of the darker side of the story. And that's that, yes, the waved albatross is another endangered albatross. So 19 of the 22 or so albatross species that there are on Earth are threatened or have a worse conservation status than that. The waved albatross was deemed critically endangered by IUCN in 2008. Based on a decline in breeding population size since 1994. Survival was lower than historic numbers. Population growth, this idea of lambda, was less than 1. So if the population's not growing, but it's shrinking through mortality, that number will be less than 1. If it's growing, it'll be bigger than 1. And the breeding population is essentially limited to a single small island, and that's Hispaniola. And we'll see this idea and hear this idea for conserving albatrosses from Mark Tasker. He was affiliated with the Agreement for the Conservation of Albatrosses and Petrels. And when it became clear that the waved albatross indeed was critically endangered, he made a really good effort to say, look, if we do nothing, we're essentially in big, big trouble. So doing nothing is not an option. So with that in mind, we've been spending the last 20, 25 years keeping a pulse on the population. And pictured here, we're out doing a population survey to estimate population size of the population. And you can see that there are some albatrosses in the background here. And Dave Anderson here is counting, and I'm pointing animals out. Part of how we get to know how many animals there are. And when we do this over several years, indeed, we have support for the idea that the waved albatross is critically endangered. When we look at breeding pair numbers, they've declined, and in 2011 is our last good whole island estimate. Oops, sorry about that. And adult survival, importantly, is going down. Why is this? Well, we know from satellite tracking work and interviews in ports in Peru that the declines, particularly in survival and therefore population size, are linked to interactions with fisheries. And we know by looking at the contents of stomachs in dead chicks that plastics are also becoming an issue, and disease. But I didn't want to share the picture of avian pox virus that has infected these guys and has been quite devastating. Because it's a really gruesome picture. But turning back to poetry, Emily Dickinson reminded us that hope is the thing with feathers. And so if I borrow that for a second, I can talk a little bit about what we're doing. we're keeping a finger on the pulse. This is through these land-based surveys where we go around and we record who's present, who's absent, who's breeding, who's not, and we can estimate survival, reproduction, and rates of skipping reproduction, which might be an indication that animals aren't finding sufficient food in the ocean to recover condition and breed for a second year in a row. Importantly, this is how we see issues first. So if we're in the colony and we're seeing birds, occasionally we'll find hooks in birds. This is how we see plastic in birds. This is how we detect disease. We're also doing things by using the best available science and the best available approaches. So our next goal in partnership with American Bird Conservancy is to conduct a whole island population size estimate using infrared camera-equipped UAVs or drones, if you will. And the reason for this, in that photo that I showed you when we were doing the land-based survey and we were walking around, there were a couple of birds hidden in the vegetation. Vegetation is challenging to work through. It's challenging to count those animals. And so with an IR-equipped drone, we can get a view of where the birds are so we can see what we can't see. And then my personal attitude is that we need to have a sense of urgency, that it's time for all hands on deck. At the same time, as conservation biologists, as conservationists, we need to stay hopeful, work hard, and work together. And so with that, I will conclude by saying there's another view of Espanola, and I'll say thank you very much.
What a place, Kate. Thank you so much. And we will talk more at the Q&A. C is going to come back and share more about the threats to these incredible birds, though. There unfortunately are numerous concerns, and so we would definitely want to highlight those issues and how we can all help.
Thank you, Jordan. Am I visible and are my slides visible now?
You're good. Take it away.
Thank you very much. And just a warning, folks, I am experiencing thunderstorms down here in Florida. So if I drop out suddenly, Jordan, you're going to be called in to rescue. I wanted to tell you a little bit more about what we do with the marine program for American Bird Conservancy. We have three main ideas that we operate under, and that's the creation of safe havens for marine birds. And so this means finding the birds, just like Fernando was just talking about, and securing nesting places. We also work in sustainable seascapes, so ensuring that both birds and people have access to marine and terrestrial resources. And then the idea of kinship. So dealing with that invisibility issue. So increasing the visibility of seabirds through connections to human culture and activity. With regards to safe havens for marine birds, I want you to be thinking about ideas like defense, repair, restoration, homecoming, safety. And tools that we do to execute this sort of conservation work involve island restorations, usually through the removal of introduced mammal predators, and conservation fencing, so making islands essentially out of a larger landmass. Sometimes we use translocation and social attraction, translocation being the movement of young birds to a new area where they will then serve as the basis of a population that will grow in a safe area. And also those critical conservation expeditions. So making sure that people like Fernando have the opportunity to go out and search for the places that we think there might be birds left, but we don't know yet. We don't have the data. Some of the projects that we've been working on recently involve the Moquillo Preserve Fence, which is in partnership with the Molokai Land Trust. It's about 100 acres, so it's a large area. And this area will end up hosting a dozen, more or less, seabird species, and they will be safe from introduced predators, sea level rise, and coastal development in perpetuity. What's neat about the Moquillo Preserve is that it's not just being managed for seabirds, although it's going to be great for seabirds, but also for native plants and pollinators. So we've got an entire coastal strand ecosystem in formation. I'm really excited about it. Another project that we're working on right now is the Alto Velo restoration. So this is in partnership with Global EBA and Island Conservation. So Alto Velo is a small island off the southern coast of the Dominican Republic. It's got 2 endemic species of lizards and potentially the largest colony of sooty terns in the Caribbean. We hoped that numbers, which are greatly reduced from its historic highs, might come back. It's also our best potential site for the translocation of black-capped petrel, which is a Caribbean endemic petrel, which has no safe nesting site at this time. When it comes to sustainable seascapes, we work with fisheries and energy and agriculture, development, infrastructure. How do we make these things compatible with seabirds? Well, we've got a few different approaches here as well. And we work in bycatch reduction, joint ventures. We work with seabird forests and the change of agriculture into seabird-friendly forests. Also, lights, power lines, offshore energy mitigation. One idea that we're working with right now is the creation of habitat for rooftop nesting seabirds. In Florida, more than 50% of our least terns nest on rooftops. They're already using them. So in partnership with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and the University of Florida Department of Landscape Architecture, we're finding nestable alternatives, roofing materials and structures for coastal seabirds to make sure that these rooftops are a viable place for our seabirds to be nesting. For Kate's albatross, for the waved albatross in coastal Ecuador, we're working with fishers to really try to reduce bycatch. And we're doing it through creative problem solving. We work with a gentleman by the name of Giovanni Suarez, and he is a clever fellow, and he's figured out a system that allows for the rapid deployment of long lines. I'm going to show you a little video clip. So what you can see here is a basic PVC tube, and that tube is releasing hooks very rapidly. So in just a few minutes, we can deploy 400 hooks in just a few minutes, fully baited, that the seabirds don't even have the opportunity to see, let alone pursue or ingest. This tool reduces bycatch almost 100% if we can get them into the hands of the fishers who will use them. And our last pillar, our last central idea of the program is the idea of kinship. So that idea of increasing visibility through connections and human culture. Part of this, you might already be thinking about. Part of this is, are the questions that you're asking right now, which might be, how do you get involved? I hope they're, how do you get involved? Maybe that's going out on a pelagic, like Jordan set us up with at the beginning of our webinar. Maybe you want to take a more direct role. So what can a small group like ABC Marine do with money? I'll tell you. For about $50, we can put a tropic bird igloo on top of a roof. We can increase nesting habitat for these cliff-dwelling seabirds that are in some areas threatened. Low entry to conservation. If by any chance we are gifted with larger sums of money, there are remarkable opportunities there as well for, again, creative, aggressive conservation. There's a little island off the coast of Chile called Guafo. And this island is home to the largest remaining colony of sooty shearwaters in the world with 4 million birds. 4 million sooty shearwaters is equal to, in biomass and energetic expenditure, 37 blue whales. So starting at rooftop nesting tropic birds, maybe going all the way up to the restoration and potential creation of national parks for entire island ecosystems. It's all possible, and it's possible through partnerships. All right, maybe if those partnerships are not available to you right now, that's fine. We have another partnership for you, and that's being a storyteller. That's decreasing the invisibility factor. Just you talking about how you interacted with birds while you were out fishing helps seabirds. Maybe it's talking about the loon that or black tern that nests in your backyard during the summer. If you're in the northern part of North America. Maybe it's talking about the organic carrot that you had for lunch and the seabird guano that funded that agriculture and made that agriculture happen. You are connected to seabirds in many ways, and we need people telling those stories, serving as ambassadors. Like I said, ABC is about partnerships, and you are the important partner here. We're looking forward to engaging with you on your stories, on your causes, and moving forward in a positive direction for seabirds. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much to my friends, Kate and Fernando. I'd like to say thank you to our partners across the Western Hemisphere. And thank you to those of you who back us and support us just through your presence today.
Thank you so much, C.
My pleasure.
With that, we're going to invite Kate and Fernando back on camera for our Q&A. Wonderful. So we got a ton of questions both during registration and the presentations. Thank you so much to our audience for being so engaged and supportive. One of the repetitive themes that came up is how do we help birds, especially seabirds. And C, I want to thank you for covering that. I do want to kick things off though, just to bring it all together, the threats, the solutions, Kate's great Emily Dickinson reference. Is there actual hope for a 70% population decline? And I just want to pitch that to C first, since you just were talking about that, as I get some other questions lined up.
I think it's a great question, and we need to make sure that we take advantage of one of the great thing about seabirds, which is they are travelers, they are explorers in a way that goes all the way back to the rhyme of the ancient mariner. These have been our teachers and guides as we explored the world's ocean for a very good reason. They move, and they are capable of getting to new places and establishing new colonies if they have just a little bit of support. So making the breeding islands safe for birds is a critical move. And that's one of the things that we focus on within ABC. It's one of the things that Kate focuses on, and Fernando as well, is making sure that there are safe places for these birds to nest.
Speaking of safe places, C, I'm going to stick with you for our next question and then go to Kate and Fernando. But we got several questions coming in specifically about the threat of offshore wind for seabirds. It seems like that's a unique threat for this group of birds. And it's just something very much on our minds as plans for a major build out continue on the Atlantic seaboard. And globally, we're in a time where renewable energy is a hot topic, literally. So I just would love a little bit of context about this threat in conjunction with seabirds specifically. So just focusing on the impacts and in the scheme of your presentation with all threats, how does wind and seabirds, how do they fit?
It's a challenge because it's an open question. We know that there are potential problems with seabirds and wind interacting, but the speed at which the industry is developing is new. There's also a realistic chance that the impacts are not just of birds being struck by turbines, but also in avoiding areas where turbines are. In the global context, though, what can we do to aid seabirds most? Protect their breeding islands, make sure that the populations are there supporting and potentially growing, so that new challenges that do occur, if it's wind, if it's other sorts of energy development, if it is a disease, we need to make sure that the populations, the underlying populations, are strong enough to maintain their numbers against any sort of threat.
Absolutely. And I just want to reiterate too that ABC is supportive of renewable energy if we do it right with birds in mind. This, of all the threats that Sea presented along with ABC work at large, wind energy is something that we can be proactive about. And if we plan for it, if we put them in well-sited places, we could actually do it right and find a balance. It doesn't have to be either or, it could be both and if we do it right. So I just want to encourage our audience to take action. ABC is actively advocating on behalf of birds with this issue. Again, we do want renewable energy as we fight the climate crisis and make sure that our federal government takes note as well. So we'll make sure to pass along that action alert for folks to get involved and learn more. But in regards to those islands and breeding habitats, I want to go over to Kate because, again, kind of pivoting to other more birdie topics, especially, a lot of folks are wondering if you can move waved albatross around, so to speak. And I'd love for you to talk about how can we establish these breeding populations? Is it possible to introduce or even lure them to other areas to get established? I know you have experience with decoys and sound lures and things like that. Could you just speak a little bit about how to encourage baby albatross?
I saw those questions and I'm pretty excited about that because this is an idea that C and I have put a lot of effort thinking about. How would we do it? What would it cost? Some really practical questions there. And there are kind of, two ideas and then a third that we know works. So I'll tell you about the two ideas. One is, can we attract animals to a particular island? So that's part one. Can we say, play the noises that they make when they're dancing with each other to attract adults, to attract those youngsters who, they're coming back for the first time. Could we attract them someplace else? And then the second piece is, could we translocate? So could we take eggs, say, or chicks from an island like Hispaniola, if we found and if we had another place where we knew that those albatrosses could be? And there are two places like that. One is in Galapagos, an island called Genovesa. It's the northeasternmost island, so not too far away from Hispaniola. We've seen eggs there. So obviously we've seen adults there, but we haven't seen yet adults caring for a chick hatching out of one of those eggs. So we'd have to, overcome some of those logistics to make sure that we could have, viable chicks and that the parents were coming back to feed them. We thought really carefully about how we would do that and made a proposal to a really exciting opportunity. We weren't awarded that, but we know that it gained enough traction to get some attention. So yes is the answer. It's not all doom and gloom. There are ways to do this. And then there's a really cool aspect of the waved albatross's biology, and that's that they do this thing called mobile incubation. And if you look across birds, the 10,000, 15,000, whatever it is, species of birds, there aren't other birds that do this. So what the albatross will do is squeeze the egg between its tarsi and scooch along the substrate. And they can move, meters in a day. And so, really important question is, well, why are they doing this? Another question is, why would they do this when it's costly? They'll get the egg stuck, next to a rock or something like that. Galapagos are very rocky places. If we rescue that egg from the rock and make sure that they don't mobile incubate it next to a rock again, we can increase the hatching success by something like 20%. which is a phenomenal improvement in hatching success. So it's not necessarily that there's, poor hatching success just intrinsic to biology of the species, but that they get their eggs lost. So that could actually be, a really interesting tool in the conservation toolbox.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, Kate, for sharing that, because just when birds make you go, it's mind-boggling, and that's why birds are amazing. But on that note of breeding, I want to go over to Fernando, because someone else asked a really great question about just, again, this mind-boggling environment, this habitat that these seabirds are nesting in. Does that impact the vegetation around it? Especially given that C mentioned the guano impacts on agriculture and other plants. Fernando, you've been to this place where these birds are and where they're nesting. Does the productivity, the biomass of that area seem different compared to other places in that habitat?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting question. In principle, the primary productivity does not increase. Like there are no plants at all in these areas. But what we have been analyzing in the last year or so is that apparently there is a higher diversity of animals, of invertebrates and little reptiles in the surroundings of the colony than the ones that we find in the areas without the storm-petrels. So it's an ongoing research, but apparently the storm-petrels are bringing productivity, and that is having an important impact on the ecological community.
Is there anything else from your own visits to these places that really surprises you, or are there any questions that you're excited to research?
Yeah, well, in these areas, it's super interesting that sometimes we have found like storm-petrels breeding in the colonies of other species, and apparently there is like a competition for the barrows, for example. And apparently some of them are super specialists and the other are more generalists. So from an ecological point of view, it's super interesting. And also, like, they are the base of this ecosystem, apparently. So they promote, as I was saying, the other layers in the ecological community.
That's fascinating. We'll have to have you back for another webinar then. One of the other questions I want to make sure we cover is how to actually connect and engage with these birds. A lot of folks have said, where can I find them? Where do I go to see them? And you all mentioned these far off places. And so on the one hand, we could have an entire ecotourism conversation, but folks are also concerned about the impacts of that ecotourism, especially given all of the threats to these birds. So C, I wanted to pass it over to you, especially since you mentioned pelagics. Is there any commentary on how to have your own experience with a seabird?
Pelagics are great. I am totally an aficionado of going out on boats in general. And with that in mind, there are other ways of getting out on boats to see birds. So whale watches, if you happen to be in an area with whale watches, they end up being great pelagics on a smaller scale. Same thing can be true of ferries. So a good ferry ride can be an exceptional chance to see seabirds. Going to islands frequently does. But the thing that I really want to drum home is that many of these birds are closer to you than you realize. So if you are neighbors with a loon, if you are neighbors with a black tern, if you're neighbors with a Franklin's gull, or many of the other birds that we share our homes with, our neighborhoods with, you're dealing with a part-time seabird. You're dealing with a fully oceanic representative in one half of the year and who comes to your neighborhood during the other half. So you are interacting and recognizing your distant but very close by connection to the ocean in that way. The birds are bringing the ocean to you.
Thanks, C. Our time has flown by, so we're gonna have our last question now for all of the presenters, and we'll go in order. What is one thing you hope people take away from this webinar and share with a friend? So C, I'm gonna kick it back to you. What is that one thing that you want people to share?
I want them to be aware that seabirds are out there and they benefit from you talking about them, if nothing else. So you're telling story, you're engaging with the idea of, I'm going to get on a sailboat and I'm going to see a bird. And maybe I don't know what it is, but that interaction matters. That interaction can go beyond science. It can be just enjoyment. Your enjoyment of these ecosystems and the animals matters to their conservation.
Wonderful. And Fernando?
In my case, there is a lot to discover in the world of seabirds. There are many species that have not been recorded for an audio, for example. There are many breeding sites that are undiscovered. We don't know the areas that they use at sea, which is important, for example, for preventing the impact of offshore of the offshore industry. So there is a lot to learn, and we are in good times for that.
Thank you, Fernando. And Kate?
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe two things. One is share the story of mobile incubation with your friend, because I think it's really cool. And the other is something that I said in my talk, and that I think that these problems are all hands on deck, but all of us can do a little part. If that's, keeping track of your plastic bag so it doesn't blow off the boat as you're looking at a seabird, to, sharing the word when this is available, sharing it with a friend who said, oh my goodness, I had no idea. So.
Thank you so much for all of your participation, both our panelists and our audience. Registrants will receive a link to the recording in their email in just a few days. Will you support American Bird Conservancy's marine program? As you've learned today, ABC is at the forefront of seabird conservation in the Western Hemisphere and has been more than 15 years doing this, building strong partnerships with governments, scientists, students, organizations, businesses, and more, all to help these incredible birds. And with your help, ABC can further that work to conserve seabirds, restore habitats, and address threats. Your gift to American Bird Conservancy's marine program will help these magnificent birds and their habitats today and in the future. And you can donate right now at abcbirds.org/marine or on the secure donation form that you'll be directed to as soon as the presentations end. Thank you so much, everyone, for caring about seabirds and birds in general. Good birding.